Yet we see, yet we see that in such a case the thought changes, since, for example, the thought of the sentence, the morning star is a body illuminated by the sun, differs from that of the sentence, the evening star is a body illuminated by the sun. Anybody who did not know that the evening star is the morning star might hold the one thought to be true, the other false. The thought, accordingly, cannot be the referent of the sentence, but must rather be considered as the sense. What is the position now with regard to the referent? Is it possible that a sentence as a whole has only a sense but no referent? At any rate, one might expect that such sentences, just as these are parts, just as they are parts of sentences having sense but no referent. And sentences which contain proper names without reference will be of this kind. The sentence, Odysseus was set ashore at Ithaca while sound asleep, obviously has a sense. But since it is doubtful whether the name Odysseus occurring therein has a referent, it is also doubtful whether the whole sentence has one. Yet it is certain, nevertheless, that anyone who seriously took the sentence to be true or false would ascribe to the name Odysseus a referent, not merely a sense, for it is the referent of the name which is held to be or not to be characterized by the predicate. Whoever does not consider the referent to exist can neither apply nor withhold the predicate. But in that case, it would be superfluous to advance to the referent of the name. One could be satisfied with the sense if one wanted to go on further than the thought, to go no further than the thought. If it were a question only of the sense of the sentence, the thought, it would be unnecessary to bother with the referent of a part of the sentence. Only the sense, not the referent of the part, is relevant to the sense of the whole sentence. The thought remains the same whether Odysseus has a referent or not. The fact that we concern ourselves at all about the referent of a part of the sentence indicates that we generally recognize and expect a referent of the sentence itself. A thought loses value for us as soon as we recognize that the referent of one of its parts is missing. We are therefore justified in not being satisfied with the sense of a sentence, as in inquiring also as to its referent. But now, what do we want every proper name to have not only a sense, but also a referent? Why is the thought not enough for us? Because, and to the extent that we are concerned with its truth value. This is not always the case. In hearing an epic poem, for instance, apart from the euphony of the language, we are interested only in the sense of the sentences and the images and the feelings thereby aroused. The question of truth would cause us to abandon aesthetic delight for an attitude of scientific investigation. Hence, it is a matter of indifference to us whether the name Odysseus, for instance, has a referent, so long as we accept the poem as a work of art. It is the striving for truth that drives us always to advance from the sense to the referent. We have seen that the referent of a sentence may always be sought whenever the reference of its components are involved, and that this is the case when and only when we are inquiring after the truth value. We are therefore driven into accepting the truth value of a sentence as its referent. The truth value of a sentence, I understand the circumstance that it is true or not. There are no further truth values. For brevity, I call the one the true, the other the false. Every declarative sentence concerned with the reference of its words is therefore to be regarded as a proper name, and its referent, if it exists, is either the true or the false. These two objects are recognized, if only implicitly, by everybody who judges something to be true, and so even by a skeptic. The designation of the truth values as objects may appear to be an arbitrary fancy, or perhaps a mere play upon words, from which no profound consequences could be drawn. What I mean by an object can be more exactly discussed. What I mean by an object can be more exactly discussed only in connection with concept and reaction. Oh, what I mean by an object, okay, as objects. The designation of truth values as objects may appear to be arbitrary or fancy. Okay. I will reserve this for another article. But so much should be. Where is this? Already be clear that in every judgment, no matter how trivial, the step from the level of thought to the level of reference, the objective, has already been taken. One might be tempted to regard the relation of the thought to the true not as that of the sense to the referent, but rather as that of subject to predicate. One can say, indeed, the thought that 5 is a prime number is true, but closer examination shows that nothing more has been said than in the simple sentence, 5 is a prime number. The truth claim arises in each case from the form of the declarative sentence. And when the latter lacks its usual force, that is, in the mouth of an actor upon the stage, even the sentence, the thought that 5 is a prime number is true, contains only a thought, and indeed the same thought as the simple 5 is a prime number. It follows that the relation of the thought to the true may not be compared with that of subject to predicate. Subject and predicate, understood in the logical sense, are indeed elements of thought. They stand on the same level for knowledge. By combining subject and predicate, one reaches only a thought, never passes from a sense to its referent, never from a thought to its truth value. One moves at the same level and never advances from one level to the next. A truth value cannot be a part of a thought any more than, say, the sun can, for it is not a sense but an object. If our supposition that the referent of a sentence is its truth value is correct, the latter must remain unchanged when a part of a sentence is replaced by an expression having the same referent. And this is in fact the case. Leibniz explains, Eadem, this is Latin, Eadem sunt quae sibi, mutuo substiu possunt salva veritale. What else but a truth value could be found that belongs quite generally to every sentence concerned with the reference of its components and remains unchanged by substitutions of the kind in question. If now the truth value of a sentence is its referent, then on the one hand, all truth sentences have the same referent, and so on the other hand, to all false sentences. From these, we see that in the referent of the sentence, all that is specific is obliterated. We can never be concerned only with the referent of a sentence, but again the mere thought alone yields no knowledge, but only the thought together with its referent, that is, its truth value. Judgments can be regarded as advances from a thought to a truth value. Naturally, this cannot be defined, this cannot be a definition. Judgment is something quite peculiar and incomparable. One might also say that judgments are distinctions of parts within truth values. Such distinction occurs by a return to the thought. For every sense belonging to a truth value, there would correspond its own manner of analysis. However, I have here used the word part in a special sense. I have in fact transferred the relation between the parts and the whole of the sentence to its referent by calling the referent of a word part of the referent of the sentence if the word itself is a part of the sentence. Parts. So the sense of a sentence is made by the parts of the sentence as its referent. This way of speaking can certainly be attacked because in the case of a referent, the whole and one part do not suffice to determine the remainder, and because the word part is already used in another sense of bodies, a special term would be needed. A special term would need to be invented. The sub-referent shall now be put to further test. We have found that the truth value of a sentence remains unchanged, but by another having the same referent. We have not yet considered the case in which the expression "to be replaced" is itself a sentence. Now, if our view is correct, the truth value of a sentence contains another as part. Now, if our view is correct, the truth value of a sentence containing another as part must remain unchanged when the part is replaced by another sentence having the same truth value. Exceptions are to be expected when the whole sentence or its part is direct or indirect quotation. In such cases, as we have seen, also don't have their customary reference. In direct quotation, a sentence designates another sentence, and in indirect quotation, a thought. We are thus led to consider subordinate sentences or clauses. These occur as parts of a sentence structure from the logical standpoint, likewise a sentence. But here we meet the question whether it is also true of the subordinate sentence that its referent is a truth value. Of indirect quotation, we already know the opposite. Grammarians view subordinate clauses as representatives of parts of sentences and divide them accordingly into adjective clauses, adverbial clauses. This might generate the supposition that the referent of a subordinate of a value, but rather of the same kind as the referent of a noun or adjective or adverb, in short, or a part of a sentence whose sense was not a thought but only a part of a thought. Only a more thorough investigation can clarify the issue. In doing so, we shall not follow the grammatical category strictly, group together what is logically of the same kind. Let us first search for cases in which the sense of the subordinate clause, as we've just supposed, is not an independent thought. The case of an abstract noun clause introduced by that includes the case of indirect quotation in which we have seen the words to have their indirect reference coinciding with what is customarily their sense. In this case then, a subordinate clause has for its referent a thought, not a truth value, a sense, not a thought, but a sense of the words the thought that, which is only a part. Imagine reading this in German. Which is only a part of the thought of the entire complex sentence. This happens after say, hear, be of the opinion, be convinced, conclude, and similar words. Otherwise, and indeed somewhat complicated, is the situation after words like perceive, know, fancy, which are to be considered later. That in the cases of the first kind, the referent of the subordinate clause is in fact the thought can also be recognized by seeing that it is indifferent to the truth of the whole whether the subordinate clause is true or false. Let us compare, for instance, the two sentences. Copernicus believed that the planetary orbits are circles, and Copernicus believed that the apparent motion of the sun is produced by the real motion of the earth. One subordinate clause can be substituted for the other without harm to the truth. The main clause and the subordinate clause together have as their sense only a single thought, and the truth of the whole includes neither the truth nor the untruth of the subordinate clause. In such cases, it is not permissible to replace one expression in a subordinate clause by another having the same customary referent, but only by one having the same indirect referent, that is, the same customary sense. If somebody were to conclude the referent of a sentence is not its truth value, for then it could always be replaced by another sentence of the same truth value, would prove too much, one might just as well claim that the referent of morning star is not Venus, since one may not always say Venus. One has the right to conclude only that the referent of a sentence is not always its truth value, and morning star does not always refer to the planet Venus, namely, when the word has its indirect referent. An exception of such a kind occurs in the subordinate clause just considered, whose reference, if one says, it seems that, one means, it means to me, or it means it seems to me that, or I think that. We therefore have the same case again. The situation is similar in the case of expressions such as to be pleased, to regret, to approve, to blame, to hope, to fear. If, toward the end of the Battle of Waterloo, Wellington was glad that the Prussians were coming, the basis for his joy was a conviction. Had he been deceived, he would have been no less pleased so long as his illusion lasted, and before he became so convinced he could not have been pleased that the Prussians were coming, even though in fact they might have been already approaching. Just as a conviction or a belief is the ground of a feeling, it can, oh, it can, as in reference, also be the ground of a conviction. In the sentence, Columbus inferred from the roundness of the earth that he could reach India by traveling towards the west. We have as reference the parts of two thoughts, and the earth. We have a reference of the two parts, two thoughts, that the earth is round, and that Columbus, by traveling to the west, could reach India. All that is relevant here is that Columbus was convinced of both, and that one conviction was the ground for the other. Whether the earth is really round and whether Columbus could really reach India by traveling to the west are immaterial to the truth of our sentence. But it is not immaterial whether we replace the earth by the planet which is accompanied by a moon whose diameter is greater than the fourth part of its own. Here also, we have the indirect reference. Adverbial clauses of purpose beginning with in order to also belong here. For obviously, therefore, indirect reference for the words subjunctive mood. A subordinate clause with that after command, ask, forbid would appear in direct speech as an imperative. Such a clause has no referent, but only a sense. A command, request, and indeed are indeed not thoughts, yet they stand on the same level as thoughts. Hence, in subordinate clauses depend and ask, etc., words have their indirect. The referent of such a clause is therefore not a truth value, but a command, a request. The case is similar to the dependent question, not to know what. It is easy to have their indirect reference. Dependent clauses expressing questions and beginning with who, what, where, when, how, by what means, etc., seem at times to approximate very closely to adverbial clauses in which words have their customary reference. These cases are distinguished linguistically by the mood of the verb. In the case of the subjunctive, we have a dependent question, an indirect reference of the words, so that a proper name in general be replaced by another name of the same object. In the cases so far considered, the words of the subordinate clauses had direct reference, and this made it clear that the referent of the subordinate clause itself was indirect, that is, not a truth value, a thought, a command, a request, a question. A subordinate clause could be regarded as a noun. Indeed, one could say as a proper name of that thought, that command, and so on, which it represented in the context of the sentence structure. We now come to other subordinate clauses in which the words do have their customary reference, without, however, a thought occurring, a sense, and a truth value as referent. How this is possible is best made clear by examples.